Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Sofa Series Artist Spotlight. Today with me is the inimitable, the most incredible, the super divine and wonderful Judith Hamann, cellist, who is Australian but is not there right now, is currently sheltering in place in Finland. Welcome!
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Judy, how the hell did you get to Finland?
Well, since I left San Diego, I actually haven't lived anywhere. I've just kind of like drifted from
Yeah.
thing to thing for a while. And so it just so happened that on February I was on tour in Europe and I had like maybe a year before got selected to do this residency. And I'd spent most of the last year, like whenever I was on tour and things were hard, being like, just gotta make it till March, and
Yeah.
then you can have like a little bit of calm. So I arrived here at the start of March, and like a few days later, the world shut down. So it's really fortunate that I'm here because I have a workspace and I'm on an island in like outside of Helsinki. I have to get a boat to go to the city. Um, and I could have been sleeping on a floor in central England instead. So this is really lucky that like I made it here before things got real.
Right, yeah, like actually literally in isolation out there.
Yeah.
Like how many people are in the little area that you were in right now?
Well, it's kind of like it's like all these little islands that are connected by footbridges. So I'm on island B.
Sexy.
Uh, yeah.
The great,
Um,
yeah, right, like the great Finnish god of of accounting. B.
and yeah, I think there's like a few hundred people on all the islands. There's also a minimum security prison on the islands.
Cool.
In the grand tradition of artist residencies being uh, close to prisons, seems to happen to me a lot. I did one last year where the view from my studio and my living space was of Austria's largest male high security prison where Fritzl is.
Oh,
So
oh, that's neat.
yeah, but Finland is very progressive, and like it's not a prison uh, multiplex corporate situation in the same way as other places. So I think it's pretty chill. But no, there are not many people here. So I'm in a really lucky situation because I can go for a walk and like maybe not see anyone, except maybe I'll see someone occasionally at a distance.
Yeah, yeah.
There are two other artists here, but we're all kind of, been isolating, so haven't been hanging out. Although sometimes we will borrow things by a system of like leaving things in the laundry room and swapping.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Everyone's
very nice.
everyone's
Yeah.
been taking it very seriously, but things in Finland are starting to loosen up now.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think schools opened this week.
Oh,
Wild.
that is pretty wild.
Yeah.
That is like not our reality at all. Everything
Yeah.
is still wildly chaotic, and people don't seem to believe facts here, which is alarming and
Yeah.
upsetting.
I mean, the Finland have that interesting thing where they've actually been doing like
Testing.
a online like reading literacy and stuff. It's like they're the best in the world apparently in terms of people who can like identify something as being like from a correct source or not. And they've had like like a long-term like education program that's around online news literacy and how to identify things that are not real.
What what is this magical place?
And that's run by the head of state is like a 36-year-old woman.
I
I
know.
know,
I
it's just
just, it's just rad. I just,
yeah.
I was reading an article saying, of course, it was like obviously biased, but that all of the countries that seem to have gotten their shit together are all run by women.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit. Sorry, I'm not gonna like dive into the global politics of why all women should run every country and everything. Um, the what is tell maybe explain to our audience a little bit like what is an artist residency? What does that entail? What are they different from place to place? And yeah, what is the life of somebody who goes and does an residency?
Artist residencies are so important, I think, to the ecosystem of arts practice. And I think people need them for different reasons at different points. And they can be really different. So one of my favorite residencies that I've ever done is the opposite to this. It was like 12 people all together for 2 weeks on another island in Greece, making weird things in response to place and hanging out together the whole time. And that was like everyone that I did that residency with, I have continued to work with and hang out with since. It's like I made these like incredible creative and human connections. And this is very different. This is like time that I think, whether it's because you're an itinerant musician, an artist who doesn't have a home and you haven't had a workspace for 2 years, or whether like you actually do have a home and a life and things that demand so much of your time. It's like basically an artist residency is kind of like voluntary lockdown with some resources and hopefully some funding. So you're provided with a workspace and you're sort of really basically all the infrastructure around this particular artist residency, and a lot of them is to give artists the gift of time. So time that you don't usually have because you have to do like the million things that you have to do to make your life work. You don't really have to do those. You just have to like take care of yourself and try things and fail and
Hustle.
Sometimes things have like an outcome, like you have to deliver something by a certain date, and sometimes it's a bit more relaxed. This one had an open studio event which ended up being online. But this has been really amazing for me. It's been also really hard because in some ways I'm in a situation that I've been looking forward to as a productive time for a really long time. And instead, when everything like went down in March, like I was just like a mess, like the idea of like producing felt kind of impossible or like producing in the way that I expected to be able to. So I sort of since then, I've like done things, but it's been really interesting because I've had to like rethink what I do and what I'm doing, like things like working towards things that have performance outcomes all of a sudden just seemed like I was just like, no, like I don't think I can work on that right now. So instead I'm going to do some weird drawings and record the weather, like stuff like that. So
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of like at the world shuts down in March, and I was basically kind of going through this like this push and pull. It's like, okay, so I'm gonna like record some things for what, for who. It all feels like I don't know. I went through this thing where it all felt very selfish and very like you just self-serving. I'm just doing it for myself, and is that really important? And then coming out of that and saying, okay, so maybe that actually can be very important, but also what are how does this practice like react to what the hell is happening around us, you know? So I guess you're considering that. You're considering your space at this time, your place at this time, and how does that inform your practice? I mean, are you coming back to like, all right, I'm gonna play the cello, I'm gonna perform, and like how is it changing?
It's been really interesting. I mean, I sort of got hit with a double whammy right at the beginning as well, because a really good friend of mine and I guess sort of like one of the kind of key sort of mentor figures in the Australian experimental improv scene died, like right at like the time, you know? So I felt like kind of like that part of my life, I just kind of like, I feel like there's so much collective grieving going on, whether it's like for particular people, but then it's also things like, I think it's okay to feel grief for like things that you believed in and worked towards and cared about that have now like evaporated, have disappeared or been cancelled or postponed, you know, all these sorts of things. I think it's okay to feel really sad about that. So I think like there was like a grieving thing that was happening, and I was playing the cello because it just sort of feels wrong not to. But I was doing like totally different. I was like practicing scales and Bach and this maybe impossible to do really well Carolyn Chen piece that's just like really, really, really hard awkward double stops for like 30 minutes.
Man, I was talking about this with Batya and everybody who has ever played anything by Carolyn, who is the most soft-spoken human you'll ever meet, right? And then she just drops this like powerhouse of like traditionally virtuosic shit in your lap, and you're like, oh man, I have to really practice, you know. I gotta get my rudiments back. I gotta like, you know, get the mechanism oiled up a little bit.
Yeah,
she writes this surprisingly hard stuff, but it's worth it. It's satisfying when everything finally clicks, you know. That's what I feel.
The nice thing about that for me was I have no plans to perform this.
Oh.
And that was never the plan either. It was just one of those things. I'm like, what would be like a nice project for my like cello health? Because I haven't been playing really much notated music at all.
Right.
And I was thinking about this piece, and I wrote to Carolyn, and I was like, could I have a look at the score? Like, it's not like for like an outcome, but I just kind of wanted to like maybe like noodle around with it, just like for my health.
Yeah.
And so she sent it to me. So I think that was one of the reasons why I could practice it, because it was never meant for like, nothing had been formalized for the real world for it. It was like in the same state of weird suspension as I was, maybe. But like every time I was like, okay, so you came here and you were gonna make a whole bunch of new like solo cello stuff, like in performance works and blah blah blah. And every time I tried to work on that stuff for like the first 2 months, I was just like, no, like no. So you know, I did a bunch of other stuff. So like the weather here is really crazy all the time. It's really windy nearly all the time. There's like insane rain, and then it'll snow, and then the sun will come out, and then it'll be sunny, but it'll be hailing in a really confusing way. And the studio that I'm in, it's actually really meant to be like the sculpture studio. So it's just a big concrete box. So all the weather kind of like, it's really porous. There's like gaps in everything that people have put tape over, and it's like, so whenever the weather is crazy or the wind is crazy, it's like, it's all kind of like, it's not in your space, but all the sound of it is in there. So at first I was like resistant. I would be like, I would wait for it to be like a still day and try to like record properly,
Uh-huh.
you know, where it was quiet. And then after a while, I just gave up. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe the weather is just like a sonic actor in everything that I do.
Yeah.
So I started working with that, and you know, I was having trouble with the cello, so I started like modulating feedback with my washing basket one day and humming, and then like that became so that so uh weirdly that's turned into like a 50-minute record that will actually that someone actually asked me to do. Anyway, it's complicated, but it'll come out later in the year. The
Amazing.
weird washing basket humming weather record.
With special
And
appearance by Finland's weather.
yeah, and then a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, I guess. I don't know, time's confusing right now. All these geese came, like hundreds of barnacle geese, which are very interesting in the role that they played in how we categorize taxonomies of animals.
Go on. What?
Well, for a long time, because the barnacle goose, it was migratory, and people didn't really understand this so much at the time.
Yeah.
So they thought that barnacle geese actually grew from trees or from driftwood. There were different ideas, and then the geese would hatch underwater. And so then there was this whole thing for a really long time because of this particular goose that like sometimes birds came from trees, and it was also used as an argument for like immaculate conception, basically, that there were like some species that could reproduce in this way that made a compelling argument for various theological arguments. So it was really interesting, and Darwin actually wrote his like first treatise, which then sort of became, you know, Origin of Species, on barnacles, because there was so much confusion about what they were, like whether they were like an arthropod or like a crustacean and all these kinds of things. So that was interesting, but they're really loud, the geese. So now there's geese on everything as well. And then the other really fun thing that I've been doing is, you know, one day I'd just been like inside for a really long time because the weather had been like so bad that I'd just been inside on my own for like a long time. Yeah. And so I decided to like frottage, you know, like when you do like a rubbing, like my studio walls. And then that's turned into this whole other thing where now I'm doing these like impossible landscape frottages of like my walls, but then with an outside wall, and then with like some tree and some stone, and then they kind of make these things. And I'm kind of thinking about like paper as like a membrane or a diaphragm, so they're kind of like field recordings but on paper. So I've been doing I guess I've been doing a lot of things that I wouldn't normally do, but it's but yeah, particularly like making drawings and objects has been like really good for my sanity, I think.
Yeah. Well, so like, do you? I mean, you always do consider the optics of a performance, right? You do consider the way you position your body in the space, the way you are in relation to light source and other bodies with you that are playing. So this sort of like convergence of the visual and the aural and the sonic I've found has been pretty present in all of your work to date. I mean, do you consider? Yeah, I guess you consider this like specifically light is something that I'm seeing coming back in all of your pieces. Like, is that an active thing that you consider in the making of the thing, or is it just okay? Well, I want it to look cool, so where do we put our light source?
I think part of it may be a little circumstantial.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've been thinking about this stuff a little bit, because I've been thinking about like what is it like for me as someone who's like I'm an artist, but I'm not like a visual artist. I'm not really like the idea of like making finished, and even in music, I'm so much more about performance than recording.
Mm-hmm.
So I find the kind of like the completed work object that's over there, it's like something that I'm almost like actively have been like against
Mm-hmm.
over time. I'm like, no, like things can be like temporal and ephemeral and like about like physical presence and communication, and like it's site specific, it's about the space, it's about like memory and like all these kind of, that's how the work exists, and it's about like reiteration, not repetition, like all these kind of ideas. And so I guess maybe while I sort of vaguely resent the need to fix things, like
Yeah.
by recording or videoing or like having them exist in an object that's like external to my body,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I think I've decided. I don't know. This is how I feel about them. That those are like they're not the aim, or they're not the work. They're like an artifact of like an embodied thing that happened. So whether it's a drawing, that was a physical performance. That was like me like with a 6B pencil for like 3 hours in different places. And all the lines are like a result of like what worked with my body, which is like exactly what happens when you're playing an instrument or singing or dancing or like all those things. It's like you're like going with like or either with or against, or like in some combination of that with like the impulse, the gestural impulse of your body and what's like comfortable or uncomfortable or all those things. So I think maybe that's the key. I think these are still like embodied performances. Even the Lonely DJ set, I think, in some way,
Yeah.
like that was just kind of like, it was like as soon as I decided, I'd started doing it already, and as soon as I decided to hit record, like there was another element to it. It like wasn't. I like started thinking about like it was it was still there's a performance. There's something that happens when you're performing, and that you don't need an audience to perform to still have that feeling. I think that thing where you kind of switch into like a different space, and your awareness of like how time is moving and how your brain leaps from thing to thing in strange ways that happens, and how you seem to sort of like I find particularly when I'm playing cello, obviously, because that's like mostly the kind of space that I'm in, that it's like you are able to exist in like multiple perspectives at the same time. So you're like you're reacting to something, but you're also like present, but you're also like looking after something or tending something, but you're also like 2 minutes ahead, but you're also like 2 seconds ahead, but you're also thinking about what happened 30 seconds ago. And you're also thinking about like maybe the last time you played it, and it's like this like collapse of like time and memory that happens in this really heightened way when you're performing, that I don't know that I'll ever, like, apart from things that I've been working on very, very slowly that I feel really anxious about, which are works like recordings that are meant to be records. I think everything else is like still in the realm of performance for me. If that makes sense. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, you're not. You're not rambling. I mean, you're preaching really, because I don't know. I'd always been I'd always been entirely like repulsed by the recording process. I like for me, I always find that it's like, okay, so this is the artifact of something that needs to be polished, and polished is like impossible. And
Yes.
like, you know, it's like perfect is impossible. I can never do something perfect enough or well enough or good enough for a recording, so fuck it, you know. I'm just like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
My body shuts down completely. And then even in performance, if I know that somebody is hitting a record button, it's just like, well, it's a different thing entirely now.
Yes.
There's this other
Because
actor that is like invading, and it, yeah, yeah,
yes,
come on.
it's such a thing.
Yeah.
It's definitely a thing. And this has always been like a complicated thing for me because I feel like I'm a performer, but I also like love records. Like I'm a nerd about records. I love
Yeah.
recorded music. I love especially like experimental records, but also like what records allow us access to and how like crazy that is and all of those things. But performance is different. And I think the thing that I'm missing most right now is that like thing that can just exist in that time, in that place, and doesn't have to be uh yeah, it doesn't have, it doesn't have to do anything else. It just has to connect with those people in that time at that place. And then like how it travels is through like bodies and memory. And because like we've all like either done or been to performances that like you can't like remember what happened at like bar 32, but you remember like the feeling of it. And like that's the thing, it's like it's this magical thing that like overrides all that kind of like obsession with the work object, whether it's the score or the recording. And it allowed like that's where the magical space is, I think, for me anyway.
I agree. I agree. I wanted to ask you a little bit about so materialities of realization.
Oh.
What?
I mean, actually,
Is that's sort of like along the same lines, right?
it is sort of along the same lines. So it's like, yeah, it's I have such difficulty. I still haven't figured out how to make this subject something condensed or like elevator pitchable.
Yeah.
It's like one of the things where like I also feel like the closer I get to explaining exactly what it is at the moment, the more I sort of paint myself into a corner. But it is kind of loosely, I guess, it's a kind of research that I guess has a theoretical, kind of critical, nudging, philosophical art theory kind of basis,
Yes.
but it is about making like my kind of like epistemic stance as a performer like something that's like valuable and central, and that is specifically, I guess, looking at works that aren't held within that work object, that materialize in the act of performance, and only then. And there is no definitive or perfect version of that work. There is only the navigation of it in time. Yeah, it's tricky, but and that was like another thing that I was meant to be working on here. I was meant to be doing like a lot of reading and writing, and I've found both of those tasks quite difficult during this weird time. So yeah, I'll come back to that particular kind of work later.
Yeah.
I guess it was one of those other things that just felt not right to
Yeah.
be doing at the moment.
I don't know. I think that that's worth. I think it's important to hear people say this, to say that you don't have to constantly, like, okay, so you've got a project and it's something that you just like you have to get done, or but you don't, right? That
You
I think
don't.
people sort of feel like that this burden of, well, I have to be productive, especially now, or I'm going to lose it. It's like, well, no, you don't have to. You never
No,
have
you
to.
don't. You don't. And toxic productivity right now is like it's a real thing, and I
It's a
think
thing. Yeah.
it's a thing, and I think we also we even the things that you want to do right now, you might find that you can't,
Yeah.
and that's okay as well.
Right.
It's like everything is just so strange, and I think the what about ism and making everything relative, it's like yes, sometimes it's good that you need to put things in perspective, but just like beating yourself up because like it's not that bad,
Yeah.
it's like, I'm in Finland, it's not that bad, it's like, it's like that doesn't actually help. And and for I think if you try to force yourself to produce things that are not just like I'm gonna do this task today, but like about bringing something into being that you've like thought about or worked on or care about like very deeply. Like if you kind of try and birth those things when they're not you and you're not able to, they're just gonna come out mangled, and then you're gonna like be like even more depressed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where if I had spent this whole time and I hadn't produced a single thing, I would probably be feeling guilty, but I would also be like trying to be like kind of kind to myself about it. And then the fact that what I have been doing is kind of unexpected, I'm just kind of like, that's a really lovely thing, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would never have made the time to do a lot of these things
Yeah.
otherwise.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you,
That is like
Leslie.
a lovely place, I think. That's the button at
Yeah.
the end of this. That it's like you sort of accidentally happened into a part of your practice that you would never normally have explored. And I'm grateful to you for it. I am thankful for for your willingness to share it with us and in this state. And I just, yeah, I'm thankful for you to taking the time to chat. Appreciate
No,
it.
and thank you for inviting me. And I miss San Diego and everyone so much
We miss
at the
you.
at the moment, and so this sort of feels like a way of still contributing and being part of
Like, yeah.
that community.
Yeah. Yeah. So we appreciate it and we love you. We miss you. And so thank you very
I
much.
love and miss you too.
All right. Bye.